So at this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Tim Porter O'Grady. He has been involved in healthcare for over 43 years and has held roles from staff nurse to senior executive in a variety of healthcare settings. Tim is also currently a senior partner of an international healthcare consulting firm in Atlanta, specializing in health futures, organizational innovation, conflict and change, as well as complex service delivery care models. He is also noted for his work on shared governance, models, clinical leadership, conflict, innovation, complex systems, and health futures. Tim has also published extensively in healthcare with over 175 professional journal articles, as well as 22 books. He is also an 8-time winner of the AJN Healthcare Book of the Year Award. Dr. Porter O'Grady has also consulted internationally with over 600 institutions and has lectured in over 1,200 settings internationally. Dr. Kathy Malloch is a recognized expert in leadership and development of effective evidence-based processes and systems for patient care. She's a nationally known writer and speaker, and she's also been a registered nurse for over 40 years. Kathy, too, has published extensively in proctored health journals, and she's a frequent presenter and author on leadership topics, healthcare innovation, professional nursing practice, and patient classification systems. Dr. Malloch has served as the first program director for the Arizona State University College of Nursing and Health Innovation, Masters in Healthcare Innovation program. Kathy is also the designer of the Expert Nurse Estimation Patient Classification System, which is an innovative model to integrate the role of the professional nurse in daily nurse-patient staffing to achieve the best outcomes. I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Kathy Malloch and Dr. Tim Porter O'Grady to you today. They have a wonderful presentation planned, and at this time, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Kathy. Kathy, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. As you can imagine, both Tim and I are excited to share our latest edition of Quantum Leadership. This 4th edition is now using the nationally recognized Quality Matters program Rubric for online course design, so we can assist faculty using our text in their courses. So we'd like to start with that first. We reviewed the Rubric for higher education and worked to address as many of the standards as we could. The Quality Matters program has become a highly respected quality improvement model for assuring the quality of online courses through a faculty review process. While there are 3 components to the program, the Quality Matters rubric supporting best practices that are research-based, the peer review process, and the professional development process, our efforts really focus on providing support for the standards in the Quality Matters rubric. The rubric, as many of you know, is comprised of 8 general standards and 41 more specific standards. These focus on high-level content and alignment of the standards across the course overview, learning objectives, competencies, assessments, measurements, instructional materials, learner interaction and engagement, learner support, and course technology. We believe this will provide a very robust framework for education and are pleased to support it. So we think that integrating the Quality Matters standards provides both the design and the quality of the content so that it really is effective for our online students. The standards emphasize clear introductions to the materials to guide students getting started. Thus, in each chapter, we have included learning objectives that clearly describe the anticipated student outcomes that are measurable from the student's perspective. These objectives, of course, use Bloom's taxonomy language to assure the appropriate level of learning as well as being measurable. Oftentimes, we find leadership concepts can be challenging to measure and evaluate. However, we have worked hard to include meaningful goals that will increase student understanding of the content and distinguishing fact from opinion, as well as in developing translational skills of the content in their current organizations. The quantum leadership content is presented in multiple formats for the instructor to choose from. We have scenario discussions throughout each chapter, multiple choice questions, videos, comprehensive case studies, as well as end-of-chapter content case studies. These assessment opportunities can be used throughout the semester by the faculty to assure ongoing progress. As we noted above, multiple types of instructional materials are provided, such as written, audio, video, internet websites, and interactive exercises. Our websites are thoroughly reviewed and believed to be highly supportive of the identified objectives. These materials are clearly linked to the course objectives and serve to reinforce, clarify, and extend understanding of the content. Of particular note in our textbook is the recency of the references and the supporting citations that are based both on theoretical and practical knowledge. Numerous perspectives of the course content are provided to support broad-based learning rather than SAD-focused approaches. We believe the sooner students can become engaged in the learning of the content, philosophy, and application, the sooner will knowledge increase and their behaviors change. Our goal has been to provide material that is not only highly referenced but also provocative to challenge student ideas and encourage movement to embrace new concepts and solutions for future organizational functioning from the leadership role. Numerous team-based exercises are provided to encourage collaboration and dialogue. Students are continually reminded of the team-based nature of work in organizations. Seldom, as most of you know, is any work accomplished by the individual. Another benefit of the quantum leadership content is the progression of activities and content. Content begins with a larger, complex organization and moves to new principles for leadership, to increasing learning about innovation and change, and then to specific roles of peacemaking, crisis management, vulnerability, managing errors, and organizational toxicity, and many others, ending with the spiritual nature of leadership. With this approach, students often follow the trajectory, but often return to review the foundational principles of a complex system. We have provided many resources, and especially added in this new edition, comprehensive case studies at the end of each chapter that provide high-level scenarios that the student and their team members can integrate to reflect understanding of the course content. So as we have looked through and gone through the progressive content as we have looked at, I think it's important for us to continue. Tim, you can go to the next slide. Is to really take a look at how we've integrated Quality Matters. We've really integrated many internet technology-based resources from multiple sources, podcasts, videos, and multiple ways to support our learners in using the Quality Matters standards. So what we'll find is that many of the students and faculty will discover that there are many solutions to the situations depending on the context in which the situation occurs. And these types of discussions are highly encouraged. And so as we move to understand not only the rubric for this, we really want to talk a little bit about the context for leadership today. And I'd like to turn it over to Tim to set the stage for us.
Thanks, Kathy, and I'm also pleased to be a part of this webinar and to share the work that we've done as we've prepared this fourth edition and updated it to be consistent with some of the contemporary things that are going on with regard to health transformation and health reform and what some of that means for the leader. We thought that it would be really valuable and meaningful to take a little bit of time to share some of the contextual issues around leadership that will have an impact on the emerging leaders' role, whether they be clinical leaders, certainly prepared at the graduate level, or management leaders. Much of what they need to be able to confront is a context for healthcare embedded in a deeper understanding of complexity, complexity theory, the dynamics of complexity, and the translation of that into more emerging concepts of complex adaptive systems and complex responsive processes. And the role of the leader in those dynamics within the framework of a hugely fast-paced, changing contextual framework for the delivery of care and service. And, you know, for the next 2 decades, this particular contextual framework is going to confront leaders and is going to be the work set, if you will, of all of the work that they're going to be doing as leaders, whether they be clinical leaders on the front line of clinical practice, working with other disciplines and with many of the social changes that are impacting the delivery of care, or whether they will be in administrative and formal leadership roles, creating the framework and the organizational structures and the context for the delivery of clinical service in an entirely transformed model. And we wrote this book with the intent of essentially preparing them for that reality, preparing them for that understanding, so that they could embed that in their own capacity as they begin to confront the vagaries, the fast-paced processes of change, the ability to be adaptive and to be mobile and portable in their responses to these changes. Much of the centerpiece of health reform and the policy drives for the transformation of health reform are really based on what we've called the 4 rivers that are driving that health transformation. What we try to assure clinical and administrative leaders is that health reform itself is not the driver. It is the response to drivers. In one way or another, we would have to confront the issues of health reform regardless of the particular model that's used. But given the political realities that we are confronting and the model that we are now clearly needing to adapt to, it's important that we understand the backdrop, which is creating the emphasis and the drive, if you will, for the change in health transformation. These 4 rivers, if you will, providing a broader framework for the leader's development of a perspective in terms of how best to respond to these changes. The first is clearly what you know is the move out of a volume-driven equation into a value equation for the delivery of health service for the foreseeable future. The foundation in value economics and the creation of value-based service models and out of volume-based models is a huge transformation for everyone at every level of the healthcare system. But most particularly for those at the point of service who have spent most of their careers and have spent most of their experience in healthcare in a value-driven, value-constructed kind of model, or a volume-driven, volume-constructed kind of model. And a part of the challenge now is to begin to reconstruct and recalibrate based on value metrics and volume metrics. If you think about all the work around the triple aim, the new emerging drive for reconfiguring and recalibrating health delivery systems, the ability to transparently and comparatively provide data about service excellence, data about number 2, quality and impact outcomes, and number 3, affordability and price. Again, transparent comparative data that now will compare organizations based on their performance, particularly performance driven by clinical activities and the impact of clinical responses to the needs of populations, of the continuum of care, and of those whole ranges of services found in episodes of care that now need to demonstrate some impact, some change, some value in a comparative, transparent environment that demonstrates the reason to essentially receive high levels of income, high levels of return on investment, high levels of payment when compared to performance of others. So this competitive, comparative, value-based equation will be really critical to the future of healthcare delivery, and something leaders, clinical or administrative, will now need to bring to their skill set as a part of building a foundation of accountable care. Now, a part of the challenge that we have to confront again over the next 2 decades is the movement away from essentially responsible care models or process care models into accountable care models, where we're now looking at the continuum of health service, not essentially event-based clinical delivery, late-stage intervention, simply tertiary care-driven kinds of responses that predominate as the model for delivery. Backing up, if you will, creating much more continuum-based, longer-term delivery-based systems that in many ways now represent a commitment to achieving a higher level of health and a reduction in the need for high-intensity, high-cost, high-intervention services, so that we can now begin to start looking at the growing demand for much more primary continuum-based care and creating and structuring organizations, models, systems, approaches, clinical dynamics, partnerships, interdisciplinary relationships around that results in accountable care around the triple aim: service, quality, and price. Which leads us essentially to the third reality, is that we will increasingly be a much more partnership-based, continuum-based delivery system that will require good interface between the disciplines. And this notion of interface, of life going on at the intersection, of managing those intersections between care, between providers, between service models, between partners in delivering service, between the community and the individual, stakeholders, family, significant others, that whole notion of managing those intersections, those interfaces between all of those constituencies in a way that is relevant and meaningful and produces sustainable value. That will be a mainstay of much of the skill set necessary for the leader for the foreseeable future. And increasingly, because we're in the socio-technical age and we are being driven more and more by the reality of living within the context of a digital reality, digitalization will deepen and will broaden as a part of our human experience, and we will be using those tools at increasing levels that will demonstrate an acceleration in our portability, in our mobility, in our fluidity, in our transparency of conversation, in our ability to access people, to change our notion of presence from being a geographical reality to being essentially a digital reality. All of this acting as an overlay, as a part of the constituents of our environment, a part of the elements that we will be dealing with, that will be essentially impacting the decisions that we make with regard to service and delivery and care and interaction and relationships and communication, all of which will now be informed and influenced and in many ways constructed by a technology that gives the user much more capacity and the provider much more fluidity in terms of how those services will be rendered. So those essentially are the drivers to a system that is fundamentally accountability-based. So all of the elements that relate to providing sustainable, effective, meaningful clinical performance, redesigning and reconstructing the operational systems which provide the necessary support to sustain clinical systems, and then creating the patient models, the delivery models, the service models, and the metrics necessary to make sure that the clinical system works and operates effectively. These are going to be the content of the work of clinical and administrative leaders for the foreseeable future, and now must be a part of their mental models, a part of their conversations, a part of their case understanding. And in the text, what we've tried to do is build the cases around these realities, build the interactional learning processes around real-time shifts in the content and the context and the operations and the reality and the relationships necessary to sustain a model, building it all on the increasingly deterministic and definitive health information infrastructure, which will essentially be the tool set that most leaders will need to utilize with great capacity and skill as they manage and lead and help to create and facilitate the dynamics of an effective and sustainable operating system in healthcare, all to address essentially emerging model in health transformation that will clearly redefine the relationship of the provider to the user, the relationship of providers to each other, and the relationship of the provider to the society and the culture within which all of these service processes unfold. Calling the leader to be able to develop the tools for user-centered delivery system, to be able to develop the skill sets and the competencies necessary to advance practice and to change the character and the foundations, the fundamental foundations of practice, in order to ultimately have an impact on the health of the nation, the real drive for health transformation, the real drive for health reform, in a way that creates metrics that demonstrate that we are able to define new models of care that raise the level of health and create a sustainable model that in some way assures that level of health will be maintained over the long term. And so leadership essentially will be managing the challenges and the vagaries of a transformational system, managing the shifts and the loss of what people know, the introduction of new mechanisms, new processes, new terms of engagement, new rules, if you will, the development of a script that can be tested and modeled and experimented and validated and using new metrics to determine whether it works, defining a different capacity for work, for delivering care, for practicing, for relating, and for integrating all of that in a world that is constantly moving and advancing just in time, in real time, and being able to make the kinds of changes in a nimble and dynamic way that harnesses the constructs of a chaotic environment and recognizes its normativeness in the experience of leadership and work, and to be able to transform it in a way that can be engaged, where meaning can be found, and where a challenge can be essentially embraced and outcomes can be achieved. So essentially in this environment, the leader serves as a catalyst for all of the dynamics that are unfolding. And this whole notion of catalysis in leadership now calls the leader to a different frame for skills and for understanding the role, and essentially leading life in a networked organization that is constantly dynamic and moving and shifting and adjusting and changing, and that demonstrates an interaction between the agents, the human beings, and all the processes and dynamics which advance us, improve our experience, enhance the quality of that interaction, and assure an impact that is meaningful, valuable, and makes a difference in ways that can now be measured, in ways that can be deterministic, and in ways that can result in values that we anticipate, in values that are clear expectations, in values that can be validated between process and outcome in meaningful ways, and can be sustained when they demonstrate that they alter and change the health script, the life script, and the net social and aggregated health status of those that we serve in meaningful ways. And that dealing with these networks of intersections, relationships, interactions, communications, social constructs, and a culture are all going to be the definitive framework for the work of leaders for the foreseeable future. Also, what is really critical, and a part of the text that we've really tried to incorporate at every level of discussion, is this whole notion that we're now having to innovate, and innovation itself is a science and is a methodology and a process that is a critical element of the role of the leader. Whether the leader be a leader in practice or the leader be a leader in organizational systems, being able to innovate, alter, challenge, and change organizations wherever you're planted is going to be an important element of the role that needs to be developed in the skill sets of the leader for the next foreseeable future. As we create new models, new constructs, we recalibrate existing models, we refine the metrics to measure the efficacy and value of what it is that we are doing and delivering, and that we are clearly able to demonstrate that it has a meaningful, definable, identifiable, evidence-based impact in terms of the health that we want to create. And that we're recognizing that all of this occurs in a complex set of dynamics that are constantly in flow and in flux, and that the leader is not leading people, the leader is not leading processes, the leader is actually leading movement and helping people to engage the movement of which they are a part. Being able to translate movement into language and understanding and action in a meaningful way, recognizing the patterns that are existing, that are indicators, that are signposts of predictive and adaptive responses that now must be a part of the language set and the leadership set of the leader. And being generative, the leader's ability essentially to manage interactions in a way that pushes people to the next level of development, yet validates the stages of work that they're doing now upon which the next level depends. clearly demonstrates a commitment to the dynamics of relationship, of interaction, of validation, of human recognition, and of all the things that are necessary within the collective wisdom of our human commitment to making meaningful change, sustaining that change, and advancing the conditions as a result of having undertaken that change. All of these are critical elements of the dynamics related to innovation that is going to be really, really important. And remember, the leader is not the innovator. The leader is the person who enables the potential for innovation, increases the opportunity, the ability, the capacity to innovate systems at a time when the change in the very foundations of those systems will be critical. The leader essentially creates the opportunity, the dynamic, the urge, if you will, the generative impulse to nurture the innovation process by nurturing the innovator, by nurturing the practitioner, by building the practice community, by creating the spark of information, of connection, of linkage, of community, of culture in a way that helps those who are going to actually innovate and make the changes in a meaningful way, and makes a connection between the environmental shifts that occur that create the dynamic for movement, the urge for change, the potential for acceleration and improvement, and connects it to the system in a way that makes sure that the system stays competent and current and relevant. This notion of relevancy and complexity becomes critical. There's nothing worse than people who are caring and sensitive and good and practice-based, bringing all of that commitment to a practice that isn't relevant, to a practice that isn't contemporary or current. I can tell you the number of people that have said to both Kathy and I, we care, we really believe in what we're doing, we love our practice, we're committed to our practice. But the issue that's more important is to have all of that, but also to make sure that your practice is relevant. There's nothing more debilitating than caring a great deal for something that is no longer relevant and continuing that non-relevant practice in a world that is hungry to have that practice change so that it becomes more relevant and represents the reality out of which it's emerging. So that whole notion of innovation as a core of leadership capacity, of competence, is a critical element that we want to embed and have embedded in the text and in the learning of the leader along the way, so that that leader can bring into play those things at the personal level of leadership, all of the things that are necessary to be able to create that context, that energy, that dynamic, that catalysis, if you will, around leadership, so that they can bring the critical thinking skills and all that entails to bear in terms of their own role, their own energy, their own leadership commitment, their own insight, to understand what it needs to become in order to translate into action. There is no innovation if there is no product. There is no innovation if there is no impact. There is no innovation if there is no meaningful change. So bringing the dynamics to that, so that a contribution, something truly can happen. And then the skill sets, the ability, the talents, the utility, the capacity to translate the concepts that we've tried to embed in the text in real language, in a real world way, in an action-oriented way to those they lead, are all essentially the essence of innovation that drives innovation to the next level of development. And so we're asking leaders now not to just manage people, because if people are not managing themselves, then they're not fully expressing their part in the challenge that lies ahead, but to manage all of those things that within which people operate, those things that influence people's capacity, those things that drive people to be able to respond, those issues and circumstances, ideas, notions, and processes that are essential to assure that people are able to respond effectively to the challenges that lie ahead. And so we've tried to embed in many ways a different level or different kinds of frameworks for the skills that need to be developed over time. These emerging on your slides in front of you are just some of the more practical ways of identifying what we need to be able to do in terms of our personal relationship, in terms of our personal leadership, so that we bring these personal skills to the relationships that we will provide on our journey with others as they begin to embrace and engage the challenges that lie ahead of them. Being able to actually demonstrate these skill sets and to translate them in action in a way that has an impact on those that we lead is really, really critical. So looking at the language of leadership and beginning to change that language, thinking about the notion of the leader as a vulnerable person, an open person, a responsive person, thinking about the predictive and adaptive skills that are now an essential component of leaders, to be able to predict what's coming, to be able to define what the adaptive responses are to the changes that are immediate. And then looking at the management of one's own insights, one's ability to understand what's occurring, to be able to give a language for what's occurring, and then to translate that language in the language of those that you lead. That becomes a critical skill set. To be able to recognize that there's a personal challenge for every single person in the landscape of change. Are you able to identify with where they are? Are you able to not just sympathize with the circumstances of change, but to be able to empathize with it, put it in a larger context, put it in the framework of the larger journey, and then put them back in that larger journey so that they can understand the meaning of what they're going through. Be able to apply that meaning as a source of encouragement and a source of advancing their work. To revalidate that we're not losing care, we're redefining its expression. You know, care is what brought me here. Care is what keeps me here. But now we have to make sure that the care that we're delivering is relevant to the times, to the circumstances, to the issues, to the tools that we have, and that we translate that care in a different way so that as we remodel care, we demonstrate its presence through making sure that it has value and impact and meaning in the time in which we express it. And that we are constantly on the altar of learning and changing and adjusting, that we learn as we do, we learn as we go, we learn as we construct. We allow what we do to also be teachers, and we gather from the environment, from the context, from the experience, and from each other what it is we need to know to develop our way. It's not simply the decision of any one charismatic or dynamic person. It is the collection of the stakeholders, the setting the right table of the leader to make sure that the right stakeholders are engaged in the right process at the right place and the right time so that we're doing and using the tools that are essential to what we're doing. All of that is a part of that dynamics, and that we align everything in a way that makes it work and is sustainable for the journey that we're on. All of that is a part of the skill set of the leader. And then creating that context. Bringing together the pieces, bringing together all of the elements that are necessary to make it work. Looking not only at the work, not only at the environment, not only at the players and the participants and the partners in the process, but looking at how it all comes together. How does it synthesize? How does it link? How does it integrate? How does it work in a meaningful way? All of that becomes a critical part of the journey that we're doing, so that we're building essentially the framework for creating leaders that will essentially assure that they have the capacity to meet the obligations of the time, provide the kind of leadership that's relevant. So many of the texts that we see focus on management and function and process and activity at a time when all of that is changing, and a time now when we need to be able to see what is it that's driving those changes so that we can change those processes and mechanics in a meaningful way. So that's essentially the backdrop for what drives the content of the book, drives the purpose of the book, and hopefully the layout of the book in a meaningful way. So if you take a look at it and you look at the design of the book, we've tried to really make sure that all that we've talked about is embedded in a logical and organized way so that it represents what we're doing. So if we look at it kind of chapter by chapter, and we reference back to the very brief discussion I've had with regard to the landscape of leadership, you can begin to see some of those characteristics. In Chapter 1, we look at the changing landscape of healthcare by drilling down into what we've talked about so they can get an idea of just exactly what the context is that they're dealing with so that they can use that in a meaningful way to describe and to define the backdrop of the competencies and choices they're going to be making as a leader. In Chapter 2, we try to translate now the environment and the context of complexity into the role of the leader so that we can connect the leader to the roles of the necessary to be able to manage the complex environment we introduced in Chapter 1, to begin to start idealizing and identifying that within the skill sets of leadership itself. Kathy?
Thanks, Tim. And if you look at Chapter 3, our focus was on evidence-based leadership, or what's the backdrop for the evidentiary world. We focused on accountability and demand, and then value. How do we get the evidence for a value-driven system? We wanted to make sure leaders were able to create or knew how to create the context for evidentiary practice. In Chapter 4, then we went to innovation and leadership. What do you need to do to create the culture for innovation? What's the requisite structure for innovation to be facilitated? How do we support creativity in a world of operations? And then what are the leader attributes and roles for successful innovation? Chapter 5 is about leading innovation, unique skills for leading change. It's very different than operations and focusing on stability. The requisites for health innovation, the innovation competencies that leaders want to have, and then also applications of innovation in complex health systems.
In Chapter 6, we try to remind them that for all the dynamics of change and the shifts and adjustments in a changing world, that there are normative conflicts out there. There are conflicting goals, there are conflicting priorities, there are conflicting ideas and notions, and then there's the normative human conflicts that are embedded in all human interaction. And so what we've tried to do is really give them a foundation of what that is, what that means, why that's important in the role of a leader, and then some of the skill sets that are necessary to be able to work through them, to manage through them, to incorporate them, to understand the value that they contribute to the energy and the dynamics of change, and to make that also an acceptable and relevant part of their leadership skills, so that as a normative practice, it's not threatening or marginalizing or emotionally demanding. And then, of course, change is not a straight line. Change is not a linear process. Change is a dynamic or a cyclical process. It has order in the chaos, but it has chaos. It has direction, it has form, it has substance, but it is not linear. And so what we try to do is break through crisis and break through the elements of crisis in a way for them to understand the nature and the characteristics of it, so that they can use it also as a dynamic for change, so that it can also be a positive influence for change, adjustment, and for creativity. And so we introduced the whole cybernetic processes related to the management of crisis and how they can use those, that discipline, if you will, as a way of addressing and in a meaningful way responding to crisis in a way that is productive and essentially advances the organization rather than simply reacts or is responsive in a historic way to a critical event.
And then in Chapter 8, we talk about the vulnerable leader. As you know, in the digital world, it's impossible to know everything, so we have to be comfortable with our own uncertainty. We have to be transparent. We have to learn together with other people, and so how do we embrace those risk and risk processes? We want to make sure that in this kind of a leadership model or paradigm that we really know how to embrace new knowledge. We focus on relationships, on communities, and our systems. That really then takes us to Chapter 9, which is about looking at errors as opportunities, and also to really reflect on the healing nature of our profession, so that we really see the opportunities of course correction to really use error as something that contributes to our knowledge rather than being something to eliminate and to remediate or punish. We really want to make sure that leaders are focusing on a culture of safety, they focus on healing, and the value-driving action of our work. If we look at Chapter 10, we've really now moved to the fully engaged leader. How do we understand ourselves as best as we can to have that ultimate emotional integrity and competence? How do we develop our resilience, knowing we have to be vulnerable? Now, how are we resilient? How do we manage ourselves? How do we manage our success? And then how do we translate that within our teams? Because we want our teams to have that same high level of emotional competence and ability to move forward when you have multiple personalities and multiple individuals focusing on different things at different times. So then we take a look at chapter 11. And Tim, do you want to talk about the transforming part of the leader?
Well, the issue is the leader must be able to demonstrate the ability to transform person and place and process in a meaningful way, and that we've got to recognize that this occurs in a formal framework, and there is a relationship between the formal framework and the caring and healing process. And the tighter the relationship, the clearer it is, the better the argument can be made for it within the construct of the formal, the more sustainable one's healing and caring activities can be. So a part of what we want to do is be able to demonstrate that and to recognize that there are also patterns of behavior that need to be addressed in order to kind of, number one, confront them and to name them and to understand them and then to deal with them. Also to recognize that now in an interdisciplinary model, across clinical teams, across administrative and leadership teams, one really has to understand the dynamics of power and politics and relationships and authority and all of the elements of the relational framework that influences and drives those, and how to manage that in a way that makes a significant difference. Much of the ability to get things done and to move things through a system depends on the ability to engage power, to manage it, and then to be able to use it in a way that is positive and meaningful and engages people, that helps to continue the transforming of organization as you lead up and over and down and around through the operating system in a meaningful way. And it also means that you're going to have to be able to know how to develop others and to develop processes and to do the translational work, not only related to meaning, but related to translating into action, into behavior, into performance, into impact and outcome in a way that is valuable, and leading people that you don't own, leading people who don't report to you, leading people that are on teams, leading people that are partners and in other organizations that are equally committed to the outcomes, but do so through partnership rather than through direction. So how do we use accountability? How do we use expectation? How do we use performance clarity and the language of transformation, as well as use motivation and insight and energy and encouragement and ideas and innovation, that revolutionary, evolutionary information as a tool set to challenging and changing others in a meaningful and a sustainable way.
And so chapter 13 then takes us into leadership, courage, and integrity, about how do we create that context for hope, how do we show our willingness, how do we get other people too to be willing and to step up to the plate. If we think about that, and it really becomes then our relighting of the lamp, not only in ourselves but in others, and then how do we then model all of the engagement and the relationships and the integrity that we think is going to help to advance the system. This is the part I think about the soul of our profession and the soul of our work, which really leads us to chapter 14. And Tim, that's for you, the living leader.
You know, none of what we've talked about in the previous 13 chapters can really be sustained in the person of the leader if that person doesn't spend time essentially developing insights and reflection and wisdom about who they are as the leader. What makes them effective and meaningful leaders? Who are they as the person of the leader? How do they demonstrate in their own personhood how that role is developed and nurtured and sustained in a way that's meaningful and purposeful for them? How do they reflect on their own needs? How do they address the issues of self-care? so that in order to be able to handle this extremely demanding role, again, whether you be clinical or administrative leader, this extremely demanding role, an emotionally demanding experience, how do we make sure that we are attending to those things that renew us, that nurture us, that keep us constantly aware and help us in terms of our own self-assessment and our own development as the person of the leader, so that what we do in the text is come full circle and now attend to the individual and begin to really help them understand that if you're going to be able to be successful and sustain your role, you can't do that if you also don't attend to those things that are about you and about your needs and about your health and about your personal sustenance as a leader. And so this chapter is an opportunity to develop tool sets and insights with regard to that, so that we can not only create meaningful leadership and give them the tools necessary to be able to thrive in this highly complex and changing time, but that we also give them the opportunity to sustain that in a meaningful way as they focus on those same capacities within their own role and their own lives. And that essentially brings us full circle to the text, the backdrop for the text, the drivers for the text, and hopefully for all of you some value in terms of why we're so committed to this work and why we think it is important to do this kind of leadership work at this time and to prepare a different kind of leadership to lead the world we're now trying to create as we go forward. So Jen, I think I'll turn it to you.
So Jennifer, do we have any questions?
Tim and Kathy, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much for such a thorough overview of what to expect in the 4th edition. And just to reiterate, this new text is publishing next week on April 1st. And in just a second, we will switch the slide and we'll show you what you can do to request a review copy. And I do know that we have a question that has come in via the chat, so we'll take that first while we're waiting for some folks to get into the telephone queue. And Tim and Kathy, a question for you just regarding some of the instructor resources available with the text, asking if there will be PowerPoint presentations available with this edition.
Yes, there are. We have PowerPoints, and then we have a summary of activities with each of the chapters.
We're also going to be, over the next year, we are going to be developing lecturettes for each of the chapters. We'll be doing some more video development because there is already some video tools available online in relationship to the text, so that you'll be able to also have probably about 2 to 3 lecturettes for each chapter that will help supplement some of the information that you'll find in those chapters as an additional learning tool for you.
Great, thanks, Tim. Christina, have we got any calls that have come in, or any questions, rather?
We do have a question from the line of Kathy Cups.
Great, please go ahead, Kathy.
Hi, actually my question was answered. I was going to ask about the 4th edition and when it was going to be available. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you. Christina, do we have any further questions from any participants?
And you have no further questions at this time.
Okay, great. Well, Tim, I'm just going to ask if you could advance the slide so we just can let the attendees know the URLs if they want to request a review copy. So if you would like to request a review copy, you can visit the URL. It's go.jblearning.com/quantumleader4E. And also wanted to share with you the URL to obtain a little bit more information about Quality Matters, which Kathy covered at the beginning of the presentation. That's www.qualitymatters.org. And also the contact information is available listed on the screen for both Dr. Porter O'Grady as well as Dr. Malloch. And this session has been recorded, and it will be archived and will be made available on the nursing community site found at www.jblnursing.com. And at the end of this presentation this afternoon, you will receive an email with some directions about how you can access that. It typically takes about a week for it to be loaded to the site. If you want to view it again or share it with a colleague, we welcome you to do so. And I do want to thank everyone for joining us today. I definitely want to extend a very big thank you to Tim Porter-O'Grady and Kathy Malloch for delivering a wonderful presentation and for taking the time to talk to us today. Kathy and Tim, do you have anything further to add?
No, we hope that that our paths will cross with many of you. And again, if you have any questions or issues with regard to the text or its applicability to your work, please let us know. We are more than willing to be available to you to facilitate the learning process. And we thank you for the opportunity to share our insights with regard to the value that we think this book will bring to you.
And I think we also want to make sure we say a great big thank you for your past support to the previous editions of Quantum Leadership. And as Tim said, let us know how it works for you. How is it going, and is there any ways we can make it better? So thank you so much.
Thanks, Kathy. Just one last question we did. A few questions have come in last minute here, and one of them is asking if this text is applicable at the master's level and also for DNP leadership courses.
Yes, it is actually directed to that audience. It's a little mature for undergraduate work, so we don't usually recommend it for that. We have another JNB text that we really encourage those in undergraduate education to look at, which is called The Leadership of Nursing Practice, which has also just been recently published. That would be a little bit more applicable to that particular audience. So this text is directed to the graduate level.
Great, thanks, Tim. And another question was asking if this text is available and printed in other languages. Right now, it's only available in English, but I can take down, I know who asked this question and can forward that request along to our editor. Great. Well, this closes out the hour. Again, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the week. And if you have any other questions or would like to request a review copy, you can do so using the URL listed on the screen, and this information will also be provided to you in a follow-up email, which you'll receive later this afternoon. So this concludes our presentation, and I want to thank everyone again.